Alright, so to get caught up on this past weekend, let's talk about two movies that are exactly alike. Uh, that's a joke, obviously, because we're talking about Alex Garland's new movie and the sequel to the Downton Abbey movie we got in 2019. So let's start with Men, actually, which is something I tried to not hear too much about going in, but I heard just enough to know that it was apparently completely insane, which, being Alex Garland, I was already expecting. And I was hearing comparisons specifically to Mother, the Aronofsky movie with Jennifer Lawrence from, what was that, 2017, 2018? And I'm guessing the main reasons that those comparisons come up a lot is the most notable thing about this movie, just right off, obviously, is the allegories and stuff like that. Where I remember when we talked about Mother, I had talked about the idea of, is really heavy-handed symbolism a bad thing? And it's like, if a movie is not subtle at all about itself, is that necessarily a bad thing? When it's like, when the movie doesn't seem like it's trying to be, like, despite being littered with symbolism, that doesn't necessarily mean that a movie's trying to be subtle. And the reason that I liked Mother as much as I did is because I felt like Aronofsky wasn't trying to be subtle. He was basically screaming the allegory from the rooftops on purpose. So that's pretty... Given how very obvious it was going into this as well, with this one coming from multiple directions, whether it be biblical references or, mythology or whatever, it's all very obvious very quickly in the imagery alone. It's showing you everything that this movie is essentially about pretty much right away. So that kind of gave me a similar sense of, okay, so we shouldn't expect it to be subtle. Like, if it's coming in heavy-handed and knows that it is, so we'll run with it based on that and go from there and see what exactly it has to offer, and hopefully piece together enough about what it might be trying to say. Because even though you can be as obvious and as plain as day as possible about your symbolism, it can still get muddied somewhere, and kind of everything kind of blending together a little bit, and you're not quite sure what exactly all it might be trying to say. So, or if it's, executing that well or not, I guess you can say. But going into this, as far as it being visual, that might be the first thing that stands out, because we do get these flashbacks that are very, very harrowing. A lot of the reason being that there's that really confronting sort of red tint to it. You can kind of get the vibe of how Garland's early work, like at least a couple of things, were Danny Boyle movies with 28 Days Later and Sunshine. And it's like, when you see these scenes, I was kind of getting, like, even though Garland has definitely come into his own as a director, it's still kind of nice to see, like, little visual cues every now and then to kind of remind you of where they sort of initially came from, or where we initially started to know them from. And it's like, I was getting kind of Boyle vibes in a good way, with the way, like, the flashback scenes were shot. And it's interesting how confronting that is, given the nature of these and what's happening in these scenes, because it really puts us in the character's perspective very quickly. The Jesse Buckley character, being confronted by these harrowing memories that are basically setting off this whole, what causes her to get to where she's going in this movie, both in actual physical location and mentally, where her, this is no secret because it's the opening of the movie, witnessing her husband's suicide after they have a fight. And that, of course, takes her to this secluded place, and talking about, like, the way the setting is used in this movie is really well done, where we see, like, this really vast, sort of serene setting of this sort of getaway place that she's going to. The yard kind of reminded me of, like, the yard in, like, Edward Scissorhands' castle and stuff like that, just without, the bush sculptures and all that. But there's also the way they use places that start off serene and then become dark, which is kind of like really the whole tone of the movie itself, where things kind of start to take that turn down the horror path, quite literally, when she's going down this path, and it starts to rain. When you're secluded and you're in this, strange new place, there could be something sinister about, a darkness coming and rain happening, but there's still something really serene about this rain also. And it's almost like she's kind of found her way into this new wonderland and escaped what she was trying to escape, and her whole reason for coming here has already found its purpose. And then she comes across this tunnel that appears to be for, like, probably at one point trains or something, because it's a massive, massive tunnel in height and length. And it's almost like this sort of entrance to another world or something. And the way, when we see the other side of the light coming from the other side of it, it looks so incredibly far. It looks miles away. And when we get this shot of her standing at the entrance here, you just see this mass of darkness that just kind of engulfs her when she walks into it. But this thing is going on where she's playing with the echo. She's, like, making noises, and she basically makes her own music out of this. And there's a really great moment towards the end where the sounds of her voice echoing becomes the score. Which it kind of does here also, in a different way. But yeah, it basically feels like she's found her own personal Oz or something, like this fantasy land. And then there's this shot. I really don't know what people know about this movie going in and what would be saying too much, because I could tell you probably everything that happens in at least the first hour, and that still leaves mystery. But I won't, like, try to go into spoilers or anything, but the way this scene plays out and very quickly turns into this feeling of horror and panic and paranoia and all that stuff, and then it's kind of a point of no return from there. Seeing this scene in a theater especially, was just really, really unsettling in this really effective way that I feel like is going to stick with me for a while. But in, like, in a good way, not even in a way that's like, oh, I hate this movie for just how much it's terrifying. It doesn't really reach that too much. It does play with that fear I have many times before about windows. But the very interesting thing this movie does that's kind of new in that territory is the creepy windows scene is during the day. Because the creepy window scenes that have traumatized me are pretty much always at night. Because that's, the most vulnerable period and when the freaky shit's more likely to come out. So, yeah, but there is something about this window scene, though. First off, it's very admirable how matter-of-fact it's played out. How it's not a jump scare thing or anything like that. It just gradually happens, and we have no control over it whatsoever. But because of, I guess you could say, what is at the window as this happens, this is one of the things that I feel like the movie kind of, where it gets kind of blurry on what its intentions are, in not necessarily a good way, where it's like not like an abstract thing or anything, or an intentional thing. I really don't know. I can't tell when this movie might possibly be intentionally funny or not. This was also hard to gauge because I was only in the theater with like 6 or 7 people, and they were all really obnoxious. I had a group in the handicapped seats behind me, and then there was another group towards the front. And these people, before the movie even started, these people were super chatty, and they're the kind of people that sit in a movie theater and talk at a level that they seem to think they're in their living room, and this did not stop through the whole movie. And if you've seen the movie, or at least heard things about the movie, you can imagine how even chattier these people got as the movie went on, as everybody became very confused very quickly. And so that was kind of making it hard to gauge also, of like, the scenes that elicited laughter from these people, it wasn't completely uncalled for, the laughter, I don't think. There is something very absurd about what's happening, but sometimes absurdity can fall more into the bizarre, and the bizarre can quickly fall into the potentially scary. So it is very, like I heard stories when it was out about a lot of people in theaters laughing at Hereditary, and that doesn't make much sense to me. Because Hereditary is obviously terrifying. But here I might be able to get it. But the thing that was throwing me off was thinking about, because if there's a moment tonally that you can't quite pinpoint when you're watching a movie, you might be able to decipher it if you look back on the director's other stuff. So it's like, okay, was there absurd comedy in Annihilation or Ex Machina? And Ex Machina, the very first thing that comes to mind is, I'm gonna tear up the fucking dance floor, is obviously a bizarrely funny scene. But I don't remember anything funny in Annihilation. Annihilation was... I'm not a big fan of Annihilation, and it was obviously... much as I like the book, I really wasn't into the... Honestly, the whole bear thing is the only thing I even really remember. Like, the Annihilation didn't even have staying power to me, even despite having read the book going in. But I remember Annihilation also feeling, like, self-serious to a fault. Like, I don't remember anything that might be towing this line in that at all. So that's kind of where I'm not really sure if any absurd comedy in this was intentional or not, because it does fall into the absurd a lot, especially when we get to our climax. All these people were actually pretty silent during the climax, believe it or not. I'll throw this out there for the people that know what the climax is. I'm not going to say what it is, but I will just say that in the group behind me, at least one or two of them left before it was over, but at least one or two of them stayed behind. So, as I heard them leave rather loudly, one of the people in the group said, "I'll let you know how it ends." And I gotta say, I really want to know what that conversation was like. The credits were probably about 30 seconds in when I finally got up and left. When I was sure there wasn't another, because they show the title, then there's another scene, and then the actual credits. And when I finally did stand up, everybody that was back there was gone. So they might have left during the climax. I don't even know. I didn't hear them leave. So, so there's that. Yeah, there was one aspect that seemed so absurd that I'm pretty sure it was intentional, and that's the fact that they're really and I don't think this is a spoiler either. The fact that all the male characters are played by Rory Kinnear, not just the landlord or whatever he is, the guy on the poster. And it's clear they're having fun with this, and it's really great to see Kinnear obviously have fun with this, because all the characters are so... While they're all sort of threats in their own way, sometimes big, sometimes small, they're all just totally and completely different kinds of characters with different appearances. And I feel like it's like this movie would be like a dream role or roles for an actor of his sort. I guess you'd call him a character actor. And one of these characters that he's playing is, I guess you'd say, a child, or like a young teenager. But it's clear, like, it's a young boy's body, but it's clearly Roy Kinnear's current face on him in this really weird way. It's like the way we were just talking about Seth Rogen in Chippendale. Basically that, only kind of played straight in a way that's like really sort of off-putting, but it seems pretty clear that was intentional. Like if that looks off to you or it looks maybe poorly done, I'm pretty sure that's on purpose. And whether it's intentionally comedic or not is another thing, but yeah, but so sometimes I feel like I can see where it's coming from. Other times it feels kind of blurry, and like I said, not even in an effective abstract way, just in I'm really not quite sure. It feels like they were kind of throwing a lot of stuff all at once, and some of it was working and some of it wasn't, as far as the movie's favor goes. But I guess to stay on this for a second, one of the most appealing things about the movie is, and I don't want to take anything away from Jesse Buckley, who's obviously leading this thing and her having to portray, like, trauma and grief and stuff like that, and how well she does that, and the paranoia of it, and the way she's accompanied a lot by, like, the score and, like, the background noise in a really effective way, where they blend really well together. Like, there's a moment where you can really see the precision that Garland works with, where it's like right here in the very first scene, where she's witnessing what she's witnessing, and a music cue kicks in, and she, like, kind of jolts. And it's like, for a split second, you get this idea that the character in the movie can hear the score, which is really wild. And then there's a later moment where she, like, screams, and her scream kind of goes into the score. That happens quite a bit with, like, the noises that she makes throughout it in this really interesting way. And then by the time the climax comes around, she portrays really well that whole idea of, you can be really traumatized and you can be going through, a grieving process or whatever, but eventually you're going to get to a point where you're emotionally drained and you become numb. So even though the climax is getting absolutely insane around her, is when the numbness is kind of starting to come in, and you can tell. And she's starting to be she seems very indifferent to what's happening to her at this point. That's another thing that almost feels like maybe intentionally absurdly funny as it goes on, where, like, the more the audience will be losing their minds, the more she's just over it. So there's that. And it's not, like, in an over-the-top way either. She just, like, becomes more and more drained of life as it goes on. And I could see that being... Some people might see that as, like, a flaw in the character work, or maybe even a flaw in the performance, but that feels very much intentional to me also, and works. But now I want to get back to what Roy Kinnear is doing here, where he's playing all these different characters, and this particular character, Jeffrey, I guess you call him a landlord, I'm not sure, but he's the guy that seems to, like, run the land or whatever, but he is this character that seems very jovial and relatively friendly compared to the other characters that he's playing. Where if we kind of know where all these characters are going eventually, as far as whether they'll be, antagonistic towards her or whatever. But this character in particular was really interesting because it's almost kind of like he seems jovial and friendly, but in an off-putting enough way, and maybe that's his appearance, like the hair and the teeth they gave him, where he seems almost too happy and friendly, to where you're kind of waiting for him to get to a more dangerous point, much like the other characters he plays, or not always dangerous, sometimes just really off-putting and creepy and weird and all that. And, like, we get this one moment in his first scene when he's very happy and very jovial, and to a comedic degree. And then, like, there's a point in time where he, like, just made a noise or something that actually made me laugh outwardly. And then she talks about, she's kind of, not wanting to go into the story of what happens in the opening scene, so she claims to be divorced, so she doesn't go by Mrs. And just that little detail makes his demeanor change almost entirely. And it's like, by the time the scene ends, he's still trying to be jovial and friendly again, but you can sense something has shifted in this character that's really weird and off. And then when we see him again, he's doing a crossword puzzle at the bar, and he's just talking to himself, and it's just this really funny moment. And then it's when she goes to the bar that we realize, like, I was wondering, because I'm familiar enough with Roy Kinnear that I could see pretty quickly that he's all the male characters in it. But he's kind of hidden enough that I was wondering if the people around me could tell. Because I could hear all their conversations plain as fucking day through the whole goddamn movie, and nobody ever mentioned it. So I was wondering if they could even tell. Because that seems to be kind of a big point of the movie. And especially when you get to this bar and you see, like, there's characters that don't even speak. There's characters that are basically just extras, that are just him, with a different look. And it's like, it gave me vibes of what they had Tom Noonan do in Anomalisa, where it was David Thewlis and Jennifer Jason Leigh were the two main characters, and then Tom Noonan just played everyone else. It's like that kind of vibe. But I guess the question there also is, what exactly does that symbolize? because that could be a number of things. I could see people getting kind of upset, certain people kind of getting upset to where it's like, it'd be the surface level way you could potentially take it would be, like some people might not like it because it might come off as all men are the same is what it's trying to say, and like all these, like, sooner or later all guys are going to be some sort of threat or have complete blatant disregard for women and stuff like that. I don't know, it doesn't feel that surface level, and I can't see that being, Garland's whole purpose. So there's, like, I was trying to think of it as the movie was going. It's like maybe it's something like how so many women have so many similar experiences as far as men that have, like, traumatized them one way or another, or just done something really weird or uncomfortable in one way or another, and kind of made them weary of their surroundings. There's a very much a paranoid feeling throughout the movie also, which I feel like is one of the main vibes that it's going for. So I would probably lean more towards something like that than something as sort of straightforward and bare bones as all men are scary. And I get, like, just the title alone might give you that vibe, but I'm pretty sure there's more to it than that. The question is trying to decipher that, and is the movie well executed enough to be able to decipher all these things? Because it could be a case of, and so, it depends on how they do it, I guess, but sometimes I feel like it can be a bit lazy if you just lay out just a foundation of randomness and then say interpret it for yourself to the audience. And it's like, I like to think that the filmmakers that say it's open to interpretation for anybody, you can see it this way or this way, at least has their own idea. Even if they don't want to say what it is, and they're very willing to give it to the audience and let it be their own, I would like to think and hope that filmmakers at least have their own idea of what exactly they're trying to say. Because otherwise, you just have, you're just throwing shit on the wall and calling it art. But I don't think Alex Garland's way too talented for that. So there's more to it like that, I'm sure. And there's so much more than just that. There's the whole seeds thing that's going on. The dandelion, like when the dandelions get down to the white that you can just blow off, is a visual we see multiple times throughout that eventually starts to play a role in a very symbolic fashion. But there's, that might be going down too much of a spoilery path, I guess, but it's the idea of seeds will come back to you as it goes on and more things are revealed. But yeah, so I think the problem, though, is going back to what I was initially talking about, that I said I liked about movies like Mother, was the fact that the allegories were basically being screened from the rooftops and weren't trying to be subtle. But that's kind of the thing also, is this movie does eventually reach a point that seems abundantly clear, but the trouble is because we got so much of the symbolism and all that stuff and all the references so early, it does kind of feel a bit empty when the conclusion comes around, and it's like, because if you know what's basically going on and what the movie's basically trying to tell you when you go in, like 10 minutes in, you're hoping that when it reaches the conclusion, yeah, it'll come to that point, but then there might be just one more thing, like just one more step that it takes, because it's like you get to one point and you're like, well, yeah, I knew that. And it's like, oh, yeah, I knew she was grieving, and yeah, I knew she was dealing with this, trauma. And then it's like, and then that's just basically what it leaves you with. Then it's like, oh, yeah, well, but I kind of knew that, though. I was kind of like, maybe there was just one more thing, so it was like, so really the big payoff of the climax doesn't feel as much like the emotional factor, which is probably what it should have been, because that's where it's obviously starting, and that's what the whole groundwork for the whole thing is the emotional aspect. But then by the time we get to the end, it's like it's still the same emotional aspect, and we've just seen some shit, and that's, I guess, what we're supposed to leave with. And as far as it being very built up, what kind of visuals we get at the end of this movie, There's people saying, like, oh my god, I never thought I'd see that, and oh my god, I'm never going to see anything more gross than that. Um, yeah, the climax is pretty wild, but if you have seen the movie, I think it's 1989, Society, this movie came to mind a little bit, and while the visuals are pretty wild and fucked up in Men, they still feel relatively enough like a cakewalk after something like Society. So, if you, so if the climax of Men really made you, I don't like the phrasing of that. Um, if the ending of Men, was like, oh, that's pretty wild, but I'm kind of into the really weird and psychotic imagery. That's probably a good warm-up round if you haven't seen Society yet, because this is probably some of the wildest shit that I've seen anyway, at least as far as I can think of. Anything that's wilder than Society, I may have just blocked out. So that's basically my threshold, I guess, barely. So yeah, so it's. So I guess I feel like I get it, but in other ways I feel like it's kind of blurry, but not in that abstract, oh, I want to pick it apart a little more kind of way. It's... It feels somehow very surface level, but also like it's trying to say a lot in a lot of different ways. I don't know. But overall, I don't know, man. And I honestly don't feel alone. Like, usually I wouldn't feel satisfied enough with myself if I ended the discussion of the movie with, I don't know, man. But I really don't feel like I'm gonna be alone in this, which makes me feel comfortable and just kind of surrendering, at least for now. Because, yeah, there is a lot of stuff here you can still pick apart, and that can be enough for, make a movie satisfying enough. To where you can look at it in different ways and decipher it in your own ways and all that. But yeah, like I said, this one still has a stopping point emotionally that I feel like leaves me a little empty to it in the long run. So it makes me not as, passionate about, oh, I really want to see, what else this movie has up its sleeve, because it feels like the emotional factor felt pretty cut and dry, unfortunately. So that's... Yeah, that could have been more of a payoff, I think. But as far as being memorable, that's going to be there. Maybe I just need to see it without, a group of people in front of me trying to be fucking riff tracks. That's not helping. And you might say, tell them to shut the fuck up or complain about it. I'm not that guy. I go out in public and the battle plan is to just get into public and then back out of public with as little interaction as possible. That's what I am. So I just dealt with it. So yeah. So I'm of two minds about this movie, I guess. I really like what it's doing and how open it is about what all is going on here and what all you can say about it. But at the same time, it also feels a little too straightforward, I guess, which feels kind of weird to say, but that's kind of what's going on. So maybe this is a time where heavy-handedness could have lightened a little bit, and they could have maybe left a little more... it could have been even more open to interpret than it actually is. So yeah, it found some weird middle ground there, so that's pretty much where I stand on it. That's all else I can really say, I guess, without going into specifics and spoilery stuff. So I guess we'll just leave that at that for now. So let's go into Downton Abbey, A New Era, which I can't even say with a straight face after that. So, like I said, we have a sequel to the 2019 movie, still written by Julian Fellows. This time the director is Simon Curtis, who did, like, My Week with Marilyn and stuff like that. And it took me a second to remember this. It makes sense, because Elizabeth McGovern, Cora, is his wife in real life, obviously, so this seemed kind of inevitable at some point. But, so, if you were here when I talked about the last movie, I'm pretty indifferent to the show. It's not my genre at all. But I was able to take to the characters enough, that I got through it. I wasn't very passionate about it. But it did have moments that kind of stuck out to me, and then I remember liking the first movie, and it was, especially seeing it with a crowd, felt like kind of a really special moment where it was clear everybody was like fans, everybody loved the characters and all that, and it was this sort of shared experience. Um, this one didn't have as many people, but I went at like a different time than usual. Um, and what was interesting, the most interesting about it was I was kind of worried because I was basically indifferent to the show, and I've only seen the first movie that one time. It was like, am I going to remember anything about these characters? Am I going to remember who's who and what their storylines were or anything like that? And I did kind of have to refresh my memory as I went a little bit. Apparently, some theaters or showings had like a whole recap thing, but I didn't see that. But I basically just had to trust. I was gonna watch the first movie again to kind of help it, but I just couldn't find the motivation. So going in, I was surprised that even though I did have to piece some things together again a little bit, as far as who was who and the names, um, it was early that I kind of felt like I was right back where we were as far as like me knowing the characters. As somebody that wasn't that passionate about the show and had only seen the movie once 3 years ago, everything kind of fell back into place pretty quickly, and I started to remember immediately who was who and what their connections to other characters were and stuff like that. And I think it helped a lot also that, as far as I could tell, this isn't really. This movie doesn't really need much outside information from the movie itself to be able to follow. Because like it opens with a wedding, and it's like, oh yeah, I'm pretty sure I remember like how these characters got to be at this point. Because the guy was the husband of Jessica Brown Findlay, and then she died in like season 3 or something. And then this character and all that, and then it started like and who was related to who and stuff like that, and who was the love interest of who, and yeah, but even then that stuff just kind of falls into place naturally and is something you can figure out as you go without really needing much of a refresher or even really needing having to see much of anything before it, because the stories are pretty like within the movie, with not really any outside factors coming in. Because we have what I guess it's basically two stories. We have the whole thing with Violet inheriting this villa, and then her sort of kind of getting somewhat of her backstory. And I actually really like the restraint of us getting Violet backstory without actually getting flashbacks. I feel like that just would have been, they probably would have been, honestly, and I just think of flashbacks and I just think they'd be kind of dull. Maybe if I was kind of more invested in like if I was somebody that like was really passionate about the show and in essence passionate about the characters, I might be more inclined to say, oh, I would have really loved to see some flashbacks. But as far as this being strictly a 2-hour movie with characters that I remember fondly but am not like really passionate about, I feel like we got this backstory in about the appropriate way, without it needing to break off into a bunch of other things also. Especially because we have another plot going on where a very interesting plot for like people that are interested in how movies are made, it's particularly with how classic movies and where they came from, where we're kind of at this point where we're seeing the transition from silent movies to movies with sound, and how the characters end up getting caught up in this in a very interesting story decision to have this be the other plot. So we get some new characters coming in as this movie is being made around our characters, or the characters are kind of around this movie being made. And so we get new characters like a director that's played by Hugh Dancy and an actor that is Dominic West. Kind of filling in that tradition of kind of seeing like these very recognizable actors come in and out of this series or these movies. And they fit in pretty nicely. I had to, like, obviously Hugh Dancy's a new character, but it kind of had to register with me, like, has he not been on this show before? Because he fits in perfectly. I was just talking to a friend just yesterday who was talking about how bad the new Law and Order is, and we were having the discussion of, is Hugh Dancy a good actor or not? yeah, there's Hannibal, and he's really, likable in the Jane Austen book club and stuff like that. And Dominic West fits in pretty easily here, especially as like this very sort of classic actor that fits in both to the silent era and the as the sound era is coming in. I guess the only thing that's really distracting about the whole movie plot of this particular movie is that the plot basically becomes Singing in the Rain, where we have like Dominic West obviously can transition very well from one to the other, but the actress, his fellow actress, can't. Her voice isn't suited for sound, so they have to redub her with Michelle Dockery, and that becomes a whole plot in itself. And it's like it's kind of charming within this, but at the same time, it's like Singing in the Rain already exists. So it's kind of weird that this movie just sort of adopted Singing in the Rain after a while, but it's still charming enough, and like to see them kind of see the filmmaking process through these characters in particular, especially when it gets almost, it's kind of weird to say about Downton Abbey, almost like a meta aspect, where a lot of the characters are disgusted about the idea of just movies in general and how like the whole filmmaking process is just so foreign to them. And like Violet in particular keeps saying things like, keeps taking digs at movies in general, and it's like, oh, why don't movies just not exist? And it's like, to hear this from an actress that has 2 Oscars is really fun. You get like this almost meta sense of seeing these actors that are on a movie set and acting in a movie having to say, oh, movies are so weird. Like the whole process is so weird. And that's so that's kind of funny in itself. But there is, because I do know that this show is, usually you would think this is an insult, but this show is lovingly referred to by its fans as a soap opera. And so these emotional beats are going to start coming out. There's going to be characters that are getting, terminally sick and stuff like that, or potentially terminally sick. And there is one scene in particular where Hugh Bonneville has a very emotional scene that's actually quite sudden and unexpected. Not necessarily the scene itself or the development, but the way he plays it is like very unexpected in this really effective way. And so this is another thing also where it's kind of surprising with all the characters we have here in just a 2-hour runtime how everybody does kind of have their moments. Like I felt like I was afraid at the start they were setting up that we weren't going to get very much Maggie Smith, but luckily she's in the whole thing. So pretty much I'm trying to think if there was any character that was like really sort of given the short end of the stick. But like I said, not being as well versed and passionate about these characters, I'm struggling to remember like which characters had a certain amount of importance and which characters could have maybe benefited from more screen time than they actually got. But nobody really stuck out to me as not getting enough. I think it was it Mosley, I think, had like a lot more to do in the first movie than I was expecting, and I thought that was kind of a high point, was seeing more of that character and to see him kind of get a bit of a spotlight. But I don't really know if there was as much of that here. Like this, I feel like this movie's maybe lacking a little bit of an entertainment factor that the first movie had. Where this one is still, very entertaining, and the characters are still as present as ever. But it did feel like there was just a general entertainment factor that I feel like I felt more in the first movie than this one. But things are still coming through nicely. Like everything's still, just as charming. It's still, even though this isn't my genre and I wasn't passionate about the characters or the story or anything like that, it's still coming. Like even like the way the plot is set up, where it's the reason that they're letting this film shoot happen is because they need money because the roof is leaking. And it was like, that is such a Downton Abbey plot catalyst. Like something that mundane. And because it's that mundane and par for the course with this series and these movies, that's what's charming about it. So, yeah, it's very easy to just kind of go with this. Like, it's very easy to see, like, before I really kind of looked into it, I was like, how could people possibly be interested in this? Because the whole costume drama thing and the period thing has never been my thing. But it's the characters that really bring it out. Even though, yeah, seems like a lot of the storylines are kind of intentionally bland or very sort of I said very basic, mundane. It's the characters that bring everything to life, and it's very easy to see how people have fallen in love with this as much as they have, and the following that it has. So that and the fact that it just looks nice. It's really nice and bright looking, which you can't say very often. And it's like you could say like recently Death on the Nile was like super bright, but it also looked super fake. And it's like this looks super bright and everything looks like it's actually there. Like as usual with this series and the movies, the production values are top notch. So like I said, while I'm not passionate about it, I still just can't help but like it, and that's pretty much how I feel about the series and these two movies as well. Is it's just like, despite myself, they're still very charming, and I like them anyway, and they go down very easily. So that's yeah, that's pretty much where I can leave this, I think. So next up we have Top Gun. That's just in a few days, and then we'll be done with the month. And then well, we're not quite done with the month because we've still got our two group videos for the following Monday and Tuesday, and then we'll be going into June and whatever's awaiting there. I don't think there's any major releases the first week of June. I think there's the Cronenberg, but God knows when I'll see that because I seriously doubt it's going to be around here. And I think just some shitty looking streaming releases. So we'll see what all those are. Maybe I'm underestimating some of them. I don't know. I'm going to doubt it though. And then we'll see what the rest of the month has to offer. So, yeah, so until whatever the next thing is, I think that's it.